Thanks so much, Julia. And we at PMM would like to thank Camden Public Library for putting this on, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And I'm going to jump right in. I cheated. I changed the title of the talk as I was writing it. I want to give you a little background on Maynard because it'll help give some context to the photos. I like to think of Maynard as an ambassador in the traditional boating world. And I say ambassador because if you've ever met him, he's got a knack for putting people at ease. You talk to him for a few minutes and you feel like you've known him your whole life. And I use the word aficionado because it suggests something that makes a person excited to be alive and is a passion. And I wonder what Maynard's passion would have been if he hadn't grown up near the water. It's pretty difficult to say, because a hand-built boat is a unique artifact. It uses traditional or innovative processes to shape and join wood and other materials in ways that are precise and sculptural. And the end result is a vehicle for moving over the water, sometimes still for business, but more often than that for pleasure. And also people make and use boats, of course, wherever there's water. And this love of boats has a way of creating common bonds, wherever you might go in the world. As some of you know, though, Maynard did grow up near the water on the Rockland waterfront after World War II. And his influences there became a compass in his life. His dad introduced him to Bert Snow, who, with his partner, Maurice McCusick, ran a marine services company, Snow Marine, in Rockland. Maynard got to see the two of them working on the catboat Adam that they were building. Maynard also had a cousin, Elmer Montgomery, who was a hobbyist boat builder and an amateur photographer. His photos are also a PMM collection. Maynard befriended his schoolmate, Don Merchant, who had a very similar bent, who had some similar experiences. And the two of them together roamed around the Snow Marine Basin, photographing the multitudes of boats that passed along the waterfront. And at the same time, the Snow partners kind of informally mentored the two of them, put them to work on and around boats, repainting and rigging, hauling materials for construction projects, building cradles for boat repair and that sort of thing. And also from a very early age, as you might guess, Maynard used and owned small boats of his own. So this trajectory carried him through high school and college, during which time he spent a lot of hours on the water with his sweetheart Anne and others that they met. Maynard went on to earn a BS in mechanical engineering at the University of Maine, and after that, the couple moved to Groton, Connecticut, or near Groton, where Maynard took a job with Electric Boat. Next, he did a stint at Bath Iron Works, a 6-year stint, ended up as their chief mechanical engineer. And then did another 6-year stint at Mystic Seaport. I believe as his title was harbor manager, something similar to that. And so here, of course, Maynard was in his element. He was up to his elbows in small boats. And the family moved back to Maine in the mid-70s, and Maynard stayed involved at Mystic. He was involved in sourcing wood for restoration projects. He advised them on a lot of projects and was a member of their board of trustees. And after moving to Maine, he landed the gig as technical editor of WoodenBoat magazine, a position that, of course, he still holds today. And throughout all of this time, Maynard sought out handmade boats and their owners, and he owned a few of his own. And he continued to sail and otherwise spend time on the water with his wife and kids, and almost always carried a camera with him, to our good fortune, recording what he saw with an appreciative and ever more practiced eye. More recently, Maynard was one of the founders of Off Center Harbor, which is a web-based producer of short documentary videos on the art of building, repairing, and handling boats. And that more or less covers Maynard's black and white era. He donated these some 10,000 film negatives to PMM in 2013. And these photos they're engrossing, they're informative, they're useful, and there's so much of our recent maritime heritage wrapped up in them. We've been digitizing them gradually since then and recording the info that we have about them in our collections database. And we started publishing them online. More recently, in the interest of focusing intently on the project and pushing it ahead faster, we've started a fundraising campaign. And if you're on our website, this is the first image that you'll see. And if you click before the slide advances on the Maynard banner, you'll find yourself on the project page. And if you scroll down to the middle, you'll see there's a link to a description of the project, a funding proposal, and a button you can use to donate to our efforts if you want to support them. So I've spent some time with these photos and picked up on some themes that interested me, and spent even more time talking to Maynard about them to get a little bit of the backstory and history. We're going to look at some Herreshoff yachts. These figure prominently in his work. And I asked Maynard why he's drawn to Herreshoff designs. I'm sure it's for a lot of the same reasons that attract many people. And the main reason is their elegance. You know, they're simple, functional, beautiful structures. And as you might guess, this appeals to Maynard's engineer's sensibility. He got interested in the work of both the Herreshoffs as a youngster. As he told me, L. Francis wrote for Rudder magazine, which he and his pal Don read. And when the two of them got a chuckle out of the bold Roman numerals that were used to title some of Herreshoff's serialized work in the magazine, Bert Snow overheard them and told them, "Hey, you boys ought to pay attention to that." And Maynard did. He throughout his life, his own 4 Herreshoffs, most notably Aida, which we're going to learn about shortly. But I just want to say a little bit about generally about the boats that we'll look at. These 3 Herreshoff yachts are all yawls. This is, of course, a less common rig these days, but the mizzen sail on a yawl provides a few advantages. And one is that you can get the same sail area as you would on a sloop, but it's spread out over 2 sails, allowing you to make the mainmast shorter, which in turn makes the boat more stable. The mizzen sail acts a little bit like a wind rudder and pushes the stern away from the wind and pushes the bow into it, which is handy in several situations. Some feel that it can help a yawl point higher. It makes single handing a little easier. It makes the boat easier to handle while you're anchoring or leaving a mooring. And it can help keep the boat pointed into the wind at a windy anchorage and make the night's sleep a little more comfortable. So Aida was built in 1926 for Edward Mallinckrodt Jr. By his father, Edward Sr., who was a pharmaceutical tycoon. Originally, she was named Gee Whiz. She's a 33-foot centerboard yawl, so very shallow draft. Edward Jr. actually died shortly after the boat was given to him in a plane crash, and Gee Whiz sat dry for 10 years. The next man, by the name of White, I don't have his first name, had a son named Nelson who fell for their groundskeeper's daughter, and her name was Aida, after the Verdi opera, and so they named the boat. And she is now back in the same area. Mystic Seaport owned her for a while. The Brays came upon her when they were living in Connecticut. Maynard discovered her in a yard when he was roaming around up near Westerly, Rhode Island, actually, and was instantly smitten. And they bought her sometime later in 1967, eventually moved her with them to Maine, and Doug Hyland of Brooklyn gave her a thorough restoration in line with hair shop techniques to keep her kind of as true to the original as possible. So the spars were refinished. She was fitted with a new diesel, and the Brays had some new sails made. She's shown here on anchor next to Desperate Lark out behind her there. The Brays knew the Days, the owners of Desperate Lark at the time. They were up for a sale, and they wanted a photo of the two hair shops side by side. Here she is on a trailer that Maynard built in their backyard. And these photos were taken on one of her launch days, one spring day, I guess, at Center Harbor Beach, which is where a lot of people launched boats at the time. And you can see there they've been successful, but the frame which is meant to come before that, this one, you can see that they've had to weight down the trailer, which was very buoyant. So they grabbed some rocks and some scallop drags to keep the cradle from floating up with the boat, and so had a successful launch that day. This image was taken on an overnight trip up to Blue Hill with Ben Mendlowitz, who's shown there at the tiller. This was taken in 1980. Ben, of course, is a longtime contributing photographer to WoodenBoat magazine. He shoots their calendars, and Maynard captions the photos. As Maynard told me, this trip gave Ben the bug, and he bought his own boat shortly after this, a Concordia yawl. And note the unusual placement of the tiller there. I can't really zoom in on this photo, but it comes up through the floor of the boat so the post is between the tiller and the rudder. It comes up through the floorboards, but not through the deck, and it puts the handle at an ideal height for steering. So that's our look at Aida. We're going to move on to Cirrus. Cirrus is a 43-foot keel yawl. Again, she was built as a sloop in the 1930s, and at the time was owned by Alan Bemis. Both he and Cirrus were local fixtures in Center Harbor, and he owned her and kept her there since her early days. She was an elegant boat, had a full thickness teak deck. Actually, after Bemis sold her to Sue Drew, who was another wealthy local, she was decked over with a layer of marine plywood, but the teak is still down there. There's her Harrishoff number plate. And a quick look below decks. You see what the interior of the cabin looks like. Very traditional, kind of spare. This is an interesting photo. One of the main modifications that Alan Bemis made when he bought her was that originally the engine room took up the full height of the cabin, and he reduced that engine compartment to this box that you can see here on the right, which widened out the top of the companionway, doubled her width. When Cirrus turned 50, Bemis organized a race with some other Fisher's Island 31s. That was the class that Cirrus belonged to, and they're tied up here at Bemis's wharf. Cirrus is over to the right, and when Joel White was still an MIT undergrad, he refitted her with this yawl rig because Bemis liked to single hand her in Iguamogon Reach. And he apparently went out looking for other boats he could beat. Cirrus had a very fast hull. Later on, she was under the care of White's Yard in Brooklyn for years. This is an image from the race down the Reach and back. I believe that they had planned to race out in Jericho Bay that day, but there was too much fog. And Bemis invited Ed Maxwell and his son Wes, who were the son and grandson of the original owner, to join him on board for the race. Both men were friends of Maynard's, and as a matter of fact, Ed was the one who one day in the mid-1960s told Maynard that he should go check out a yawl called Aida in a yard in Providence. I found that the Northeast Historic Film Society has some footage of Bemis aboard Cirrus, and I asked them for a clip, which they sent to me just before we went live. So I haven't had time to look at it, unfortunately. That's a good glimpse at Cirrus. And the third of these three Herreshoff yachts that we're going to look at is the Desperate Lark. Here she is at Seal Cove Boatyard in Harborside, where Maynard and Benji Mendlowitz went to visit her one day in October of 1977. So Fritz and Francis Day found her in Marblehead, Mass. as Cricket in 1939, and they fell in love with her instantly, despite the rather significant commitment of owning a 50-foot yacht. As Frances said to her husband, "Do you think we'd be crazier not to buy that boat or to buy her?" And they did. They brought her to Maine and cruised in her for decades. And the Bar Harbor 31s were known for having these roomy, elegant interiors. You could stand up in them. They slept four comfortably. Benji took a similar photo during their visit to Seal Cove Boatyard that day, and it ran as a cover on WoodenBoat magazine. Maynard shared, you can see the trunk cabin in this photo, and I hope this isn't too much detail for people, but I found it fascinating. The trunk cabins were built in mahogany with these rows of rectangular windows, and these were all standard on early Herreshoff sloops. The trunk cabins were pre-built probably in a joiner's shop with a perfectly straight bottom edge on the long sides so that the windows could be rectangular. The front and back of the houses were curved to follow the deck curvature. When the hull was flipped over and the deck was added, the trunk cabins were lowered into place, and the deck was actually pushed up to meet the straight edges of the trunk cabin, so there was no fitting necessary. And this gave them an edge, allowed some ease of manufacturing and installation, but it maintained the fair curve of the boat's shear line at the rail which is where the eye picks it up the most. You see there's a, I guess a coal stove here, which was unique to Desperate Lark. That was not a standard fixture. So when the Days acquired Desperate Lark, they immediately hired L. Francis, who was Nat Herreshoff's son, to modify her gaff sloop rig to a Marconi yawl to make it easier to handle the canvas. And Marconi rig sails, as you see, these have this familiar triangular shape that we all used to draw on sailboats when we were kids. Days had a lot of adventures aboard Lark. These photos were actually taken later after they had sold the boat to Michael Stubbs, but were the only photos I had of her underway. In an article in WoodenBoat back in the 70s, I guess, that Fritz co-wrote with Maynard, Fritz related the story of being out cruising off MDI, and they were becalmed, and he called below to his friend Scott to pay a penny for a breeze, and which was an old superstition. And Scott reached up through the companionway and flipped a coin into the water. Fritz was on the brink of snoozing, and he was suddenly jarred awake when the boat was pummeled by a 50-knot squall. With all hands on deck, they got the bow pointed into the wind, scrambled to lower the main and tie it off to the boom. And when everything was under control, Scott caught Dave's eye and winked, confessing, "I only had a dime." Later in early September of '54, Francis and Fritz were caught in Hurricane Carol coming out of Pulpit Harbor bound for East Booth Bay. They didn't have a radio on board. They didn't know it was coming. And it was a devastating hurricane. It wrought havoc all up and down the Atlantic seaboard. Some of you probably know about it, but they rode it out at sea together, which tells you a lot about how capable they were as sailors. We're going to look at a very different kind of boat that was landlocked for its entire life. This is the steamer Katahdin, which Maynard went to visit in August of 1978, right before her restoration up in Greenville. Maynard had connections at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I think at the time, that organization had a lot of money for the restoration and preservation of ships. So they asked him to put eyes on the Katahdin and talk to the group who'd formed the Moosehead Maritime Museum and had applied for a grant to restore the old steamer. Katahdin was commissioned in 1914 by the Coburn Steamboat Company as a replacement for her namesake, which had burned in 1913 after about 20 years of service in the tourism industry. Our 2018 summer intern at the museum, Tom Watt, is a great-great-grandson to Stillman Sawyer, who was the last general manager of the Coburn Steamboat Company, and he was one of the principal owners of the Katahdin. So actually, her 102-foot steel hull was built at BIW, then taken apart and shipped in pieces up to Greenville, where she was reassembled and her wooden decks were built. This was somewhat late in the heyday of steamboat service on Moosehead Lake. The Katahdin ferried summer passengers and supplies from Greenville, 20 miles up the lake, to the Mount Kineo House, which was a grand resort hotel in the style of the Mount Washington House, where wealthy patrons would come and spend the warm months. The Great Depression brought a decline in tourism, and the classic partnership of rail and steamer gave way to the rise of the automobile. And Katahdin retired as a passenger vessel after 1938. In 1940, she was refitted to haul timber in large booms down the lake. A lot of logging in that country, During the last major log drive in the US, which was in September of 1976, Katahdin was used to tow a big boom of pulp logs down to the head of the Kennebec. And this was only a couple of years before Maynard found her in this condition. Despite looking a little dog-eared in these photos, Maynard found that her skipper had laid her up expertly, taken great care of her, and taken pains to protect her decking and her interior. And her steel hull has to this day weathered the century nicely, thanks to some maintenance and thanks to the fact that, of course, fresh water is a lot milder on steel than salt water is. An interesting note, Tom's great-grandfather, John Richards, was one of the key players in this restoration project. She's still in service today as a kind of a live exhibit and gives tours on the lake. We're going to take a look at this beautiful cutter called Northern Crown, which Joel White owned. And Joel, as all of you probably know, was a celebrated Brooklyn, Maine designer and builder. He was the son of E.B. White, and he sailed Northern Crown out of Center Harbor for about 20 years. He unexpectedly bought her in 1972 after he caught sight of her in National Fisherman. He went for a sail and he was instantly sold on her. She's a 35.5-foot cruising cutter with a rounded stern, inspired by Scandinavian workboats. The design is by Aida Nielsen, who's a Danish immigrant. She was built in Denmark in the mid-50s, and I don't know the story about how she was brought here. Maynard, I'm sure, could tell that. One of the characteristics of a cutter is that it handles heavy winds better than a sloop because it's got a double headsail and a smaller main, so there are lots of options for shortening the sail. Here, they've added the mizzen from Joel White's Peapod, and I'm not sure how they fastened it. I can't really tell. White wrote in an article, which I believe appeared in WoodenBoat, this hull form has proved to be eminently seaworthy, well tested on offshore trips to Cape Breton and Bermuda. We only once filled her cockpit with water while running before a gale across the Strait of Canso, but because her cockpit only holds about as much water as a wheelbarrow, it was merely a short-lived inconvenience. And Maynard went on a few such cruises aboard Northern Crown. He went to Nova Scotia a few times with Joel and company, and once to Bermuda. So here she is anchored off of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. I don't remember the year. There are some of her crew getting ready for a harbor cruise aboard White's Peapod, which was their dinghy. On that trip, the crew consisted of Anne Bray, who took some of these pictures, I believe. Maynard himself, the Bray's neighbors, Bill and Caroline Mayer, who are pictured on the left and right there, flanking Joel White, who's at the helm. And apparently, Aline White, Joel's wife, stayed home. She was not crazy about sailing. Here are a couple of images from an easier day of sailing on that trip. It's good conditions for taking a snooze up in the peak. At one point, they got into some heavier seas. And you can see the captain at the helm there with a fortifying drink. The Peapod is riding up and down the considerable swell that day. With the, you can see the line for the taffrail log strung out behind her. And this was in the old days of dead reckoning with mostly analog instruments to find one's way out of sight of land. In this image, you can see that they have a reef in the main. So it's some pretty brisk sailing. I think you can see the chimney over on the right. There was a good sized wood and coal range aboard her, which may still be aboard her, and I'm sure this would have been a luxury on damp evenings. I don't have photos of this, but they sailed through a heavy storm on the Bermuda tour. Maynard remembers being on watch all night long with probably nothing up but the jib, heavy seas and breaking waves, and as he put it, she rode it like a duck. White's daughter Martha and her husband Taylor Allen have owned Northern Crown since the early 90s, and she's alive and well in Rockport Harbor. As White always intended but never got around to, they replaced her iron keel with lead, and Maynard has since taken a sail on her and reports that she holds up to the wind a lot better with the weight lower than the former internal ballast. We're going to move on now and look at a smaller class of boat, the Beetle Cat. These were a one design, or I should say are a one design gaff rigged sailing dinghy by John Beetle of New Bedford, dating from 1921. And like many recreational boats, they were adapted from a fishing boat design, larger Cape Cod cat boats, which were built for working in shallow waters. The design has been sold several times, and these boats are still produced today by the Beetle Boat Shop in Wareham, Mass. It's the oldest one design, continuously built from wood, and they're still being raced a century later. The Brays started using Beetle Cats when they moved back to Connecticut from Maine. Maynard had taken the job at Mystic. They bought two. One became his oldest daughter's boat, and the other one became a project that Maynard started while they were in Connecticut and finished later when they moved back to Maine. And she became Spooky and was given to their son Nat, who's shown standing by the mast. Maynard, I guess, still has this trailer, but doesn't have the boat anymore. This was her launch day, from her launch day at Center Harbor. Complete with a proper christening. And this is Nat and I think his sister Kathy on board for her maiden voyage. The next photo was taken later at Green's Island. Nat and his younger sister, Sarah, are about to put the sail up and take her out. These were from a kind of a tandem trip. Most of the family were out in Aida, from which Maynard took these photos. It was a driving wind that day. Nat and his friend had a reef in the sail. But Nat, as I'm told, was a pretty intrepid sailor. He wasn't bothered at all by conditions like this. Maynard more recently bought two more Beetle Cats and gave one again to his eldest daughter for her birthday, and has one still to pick up in Newport. And we're going to take a look at trip on board one of the Windjammers. The Roseway was not part of the original Frank Swift passenger fleet. She was 137 feet overall with the spars, named apparently for an acquaintance of the original owner, Harold Hathaway, a woman. His acquaintance was apparently somebody who was used to getting her way. So she was built in 1937 in Essex as a fishing schooner. She was exquisitely built with frames of select white oak from Hathaway's property in Taunton. And she was treated like a queen and actually didn't see very much action in the fisheries. She was purchased during the war by the Boston Pilots Association, and throughout the war guided ships into the harbor past mines and submarine netting. Jim Sharp and Orville Young bought her in 1975 and finished the work of outfitting her for the passenger schooner trade. And Captain Young invited Maynard and Anne, with whom he ran in the same circles, to join him on this cruise in July of '79. Windjammers, when they're cruising, sometimes rendezvous with other schooners. And here we see the Isaac Evans out in Pulpit Harbor at North Haven. It was a lot of fun for everybody to join up and see them all at anchor together. And this is maybe the next morning. Crew's raising the jib. Looks like a pretty day. Here they're weighing anchor, getting ready to make way. And here you see him raising the foresail. She had red sails at the time. This is Captain Young's son, Terry, who was mate on the trip. You see him there holding onto a halyard. Here we are idling along. It's like they're fairly close to the wind on this tack. The trip was, Maynard says, was a great opportunity for him because as a kid, he had seen the Frank Swift schooners hauled out down at the end of Mechanic Street in Rockland, near where he grew up, and that always interested him. He ended up learning a lot about the Windjammers, and by the time he got to experience being under sail on the Roseway, he knew her pretty well through having done his own research. That's Captain Young at the helm of his Windjammer. And there we see father and son. Looks like they may be conferring about sail trim or something else. And there's somebody up in the mast, in the cross trees, putting up a topsail, not clipped in. Maynard got some photos below decks in the mess at mealtime. Apparently, Andrea Young, Orville's wife, was the cook on the trip and allegedly very talented. This was a good chance for the passengers and crew to chill out together at the end of the day and trade stories. And here they are returning to Camden Harbor at the end of the week, the mainsail coming down. Roseway changed owners a few times, still as a passenger schooner, and eventually she was repossessed by a bank and donated to the World Ocean School. She operates now out of Boston and St. Croix, I believe, and she's used as a teaching vessel and a day sailor, short passenger cruises. Maynard told me this morning she was just taken out of the water at Mystic for some routine maintenance. But everyone's realized at some point soon she's going to need an overhaul below the waterline. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about this classic boat, this classic Maine boat, the Peapod. Jimmy Steele was a Brooklyn area house contractor, and he built wooden peapods in the winter. Buzz Hawkins was a former owner of the Mary Day, one of the Camden schooners, and he started building these peapods in the 1950s. But when he got busy with the Windjammer business, he turned the whole enterprise over to Jim. I'm not exactly sure how they knew each other. So Jim was building these things, and Maynard saw an article on them in National Fisherman. He called up to order one. I asked Maynard what he likes about peapods, and he reports that they inspire confidence, even in choppy conditions. They're very seaworthy boats. You see the double-ended, the balanced ends give them a better response to wave action than a square stern skiff, which is going to have too much buoyancy at one end compared to the other. I haven't rowed one, but Maynard says they row easily, and of course, as we can see here, they look pretty sharp. Joel White engineered the Spritzel rig that we see here, and other owners followed suit. These are stable even under sail in a stiff breeze, although if you try to point them too high, I guess they tend to slide sideways. There's no rudder, there's no centerboard. And the way that White conceived this was that you would steer by shifting your weight backward and forward, which apparently works very well. This is a view at Center Harbor, and we can see the newly launched Beetle Cat Spooky there in the background, and Shadow Island behind. Maynard's on board the peapod with his daughter Sarah. This is Joel White's peapod. Maynard told me that he once sailed his peapod, I guess, over 30 miles. That wasn't the number that he gave me, but that's the nearest that I could calculate, from Greens Island up to Brooklyn, I assume to Center Harbor, which is a goodly voyage in a little boat like that. This is a view at Greens Island, where the Brays spend time in the summer. And here we see Maynard and Nat resetting one of the haulouts that they use there instead of a dock. This is a mechanism which, among other things, helps discourage casual visitors, I'm told. Steele's peapods were Carvel planked, a little over 13 feet long. When he started building them, he was using copper clout nails as fasteners, but he found that they didn't hold the planks well under stress, and so he switched to using copper rivets. Maynard still has his peapod, his Jim Steele peapod. It's over 50 years old now, and a little ragtag, but it's still in use. The images that we'll see here in Jim's shop were taken by Anne, and I guess they were intended to be used as part of a WoodenBoat article, which was never published. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the building process, which I found to be very interesting. I hope you do. Apparently on this day, Jim was showboating for the camera a little bit, showing the Brays how fast he could hang a plank. But his rapid movements made for some tricky photographs for Anne. Jimmy had streamlined the operation to a pretty expert degree, and he apparently liked the challenge of building on his efficiency. In his banner year, he built 12 of these things one winter. It was usually maybe half that number, but fewer. And he always sold them as fast as he could make them. They were very popular. The inner layer of wood slats that we can see in this photo is the jig that he used to bend the frames around. The frames and planks he built out of eastern white cedar, and each one was cut to a pattern and cut roughly to length. The backbone on Steele's peapods were made of oak. And in this photo, he's got the first two planks up. the garboard and the second plank, and he's holding a third up over the second plank and scribing the cut on the end of it with his pencil there. Let's see. The batten under his right hand indicates where the seam for that plank will lie. And in this next photo, it looks like it's hard to tell. He may have made the cut and is riveting the end of the third plank into place up at the stem. And here he is on the other side, and you can see he's got a second smaller, very flexible batten tacked into place, and he's using that to measure down to scribe a line on the bottom of his second plank. And that flexible batten will stay in place and act as a guide for the router when he trims up the edge that he scribed on the bottom of that plank. And that's how he put the finished edge on each plank before he laid the next one. And here you see him making that cut with the router. Doesn't have to think about it, just runs it along the batten. And there he is finally, after he's made his cut, cleaning up the edge with some sandpaper. These were very well built boats and involved some pretty meticulous craftsmanship, despite all of Jimmy's time-saving tricks. In the late 60s, when Maynard bought his Peapod, Jimmy was only charging $350 a piece for these things. But he let Maynard have his for $300 because there was still some painting left to do. And I've learned that Donald Tophius, who now owns Sparkman and Stevens, also bought the rights to the Peapod after Jim died. So he makes them in Providence. And the design's been re-engineered. The newer model is strip planked in red cedar and varnished. Or at least the kind of Cadillac model is. And the lower end model, not the Cadillac, apparently goes for about $24,000. So you might have missed your chance to buy a Peapod. And we're running up close to the end of the hour, folks, and I'm out of material. So I'm going to leave it there. And if anybody has any questions, we've got plenty of time for those. Yes. If you have any questions that I'm not able to answer, I think that Julia was going to put my email address up in the chat window for you to copy, and I'm happy to answer any questions that are over my head in an email.
Matt, you said you were going to have a slide at the end that had your email address on it.
Did I say that? Oh my God. Well, I'm gonna give you my email address right now for anyone who wants to write it.
Okay, say it out loud and then I'll type it into the box.
Okay, here it comes. So it's my first initial last name, M. Wheeler, WHEELER, at PMM, the museum's initials, -Maine, MAINE.org.
Okay, I will be sure to get that into the box in just a moment. Thank you for saying it out loud because that helps out the folks who might be watching the recording of this. Oh my goodness, my heart is fluttering. That was such an excellent slideshow, and I really truly appreciate all the anecdotes that you included because it really enriched the whole viewer experience for this. So my goodness, I envy you the time that you must have spent with Maynard gathering these stories and that you were recording all these stories. So thank you for doing that. We do have a lot of questions, so let's just go ahead and jump right into them. John asks, are all of Maynard's photos black and white, or did he also work in color?
Maynard did also work in color later on, And we haven't seen those photos yet. I believe that we will. But that initial donation in 2013 was all of his black and white, which was mostly 35 millimeter, the exception of some medium format stuff that he shot very early on. But at some point, yes, I believe we'll all be seeing Maynard's color work.
Something to look forward to for sure. Thank you. We also wanted to know, Sipperly had a great question. She wants to know, how did Maynard keep the camera steady when he was taking photos at sea? Did he ever divulge that trick to you?
It's not that he shared with me, but I suspect he may have used fast film and, you know, was often out in broad daylight so he could use a fast shutter speed. And I'm sure that helped him quite a bit.
All right. Gina asks, did Maynard share any mishaps or close calls at sea? Anything stick out in your mind?
Oh, let's see. Other than that Bermuda story, I can't think of any stories that he's told, but he is a great storyteller, and he's spent a lot of time on the water, so I'm sure he's got some. I'd love to hear him sometime.
When you record his stories that go along with the photographs, are you recording video that goes with him telling the stories?
No, I did record some audio strictly because it made note-taking a lot easier. Maynard made me promise that his voice would never be heard by another person. Despite his gregarious nature, he's a little bit of a shy guy, kind of like me. And so that audio may never be heard, but it was great. It's great to be able to play it back and hear our conversations.
John wants to know, will you digitize all of the pictures or do you have to drop some?
The way that we found that's most economical to digitize roll film is that you capture each frame. It's too laborious and hard on the eyes to look at each frame ahead of time and figure out which ones you're going to photograph. And what we do as a way of selecting the best from among those is, in this case, Maynard himself is looking over the photos afterwards, picking the ones that he likes. And those are the ones that we're cataloging and creating records for in the database. And so those will be the ones that you'll see online. The best of the best.
The best of the best. Perfect. We have a couple people who chimed in with some observations. So Dave says, before she came to Maine in the early 70s, the Roseway was on a hurricane mooring in North Bay, Osterville, Cape Cod, Massachusetts for some time unrigged. He also mentioned about the sailing with no rudder. And Daniel chimed in with a bit of Peapod wisdom. And he noted that in the photograph, that's why he's got a kid in the bow. If you want to get up to windward, you got to send them up there or you move yourself. So thank you for that bit of Peapod wisdom.
Makes sense.
Let's see what else we have. How many photographs are in his collection in total? And are they available online?
So this first group of black and white is about 10,000 frames.
Wow.
An awful lot of photographs. And I think that there are just under 1,500 online now. We've done 2 or 3 rollouts. And you'll probably see the next one, I would say, sometime in June.
Okay.
And you can look for those. You can look for a link to those on that Maynard Bray page on our website.
On the Penobscot Marine Museum's website. Super.
Right.
And Dave wanted to know, he was interested in you posting the Alan Bemis video that when you get it and let us know how to view it. He was quite a guy. Do you have a place where we can lead people to who might be interested in seeing that sort of video?
I'd have to check with Northeast Film. They gave me the clip to include in this presentation, albeit belatedly. And I'm not sure if I'm free to share it, but I think that anyone who does want to see it can request it from them. And one piece of information that they'll look for is that from Bemis's collection, it's on reel 19.
Okay.
So that could be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good to know. Jennifer wants to know, do you happen to know, or did Maynard ever mention, any photographers that he was inspired by?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And it's not something I've ever heard Maynard divulge. It could very well be the case. You know, one of the interesting things, I will say, this is a little bit of a tangent, but Maynard is, you know, as an engineer, I think is fascinated by joinery, by the way that things are put together on a traditional boat, on a wooden boat. And so there are many, many sort of detailed photographs of, you know, small joints, places where woodwork has been skillfully put together, and which I think is, you know, potentially has great utility for other people building boats or restoring boats. But no, I don't know who he may have been inspired by.
You may have to ask him.
Mm-hmm.
So Nat wants to know if the photographs, when they're up to view online, will they be captioned?
So when you see them online, they'll appear in our image database, or our collections database, I should say. And when you search on Maynard's photos, you'll get a list of records. And when you click on one, the record fills the screen. You can read everything that we know about the photograph there. And when you click on the image thumbnail, you get a larger version of the photograph. So that's how the information will appear.
Okay, I think this is probably going to be our last question. So Rob says, periods were used in the lobster fishery. Arrive at the trap, let loose, free-footed sail, tend the trap, cast off, trim sail, next trap. Okay, pea pods. Sorry, there was a typo.
Oh, yeah.
Pea pods were used in the lobster fishery. So he let us know a little bit about how they were utilized. Thank you for adding that, Rob. So it's 7 o'clock now. We are all wrapped up, and that was wonderful. What a great collection of photography that you shared with us tonight. And I think it's just, you know, a great example of what you folks do at the Penobscot Marine Museum and why you are such an important cultural institution in our state. Very, very valuable. I encourage everyone who's joined us tonight, please, of course, when it reopens fully to the public, go visit the Penobscot Marine Museum. But in the meantime, check out their website, stay on top of what they're doing. Thank you for this continued partnership, Matt. This is wonderful.
It's our pleasure too.
To the rest of you who've joined us tonight, we do these types of talks all the time on a wide variety of topics. They are free and open to everybody. I encourage you to visit librarycamden.org. We have a calendar there. See if you see anything you like and email me, and I'd be happy to send you a Zoom link. Lastly, I'd like to thank our Maritime Month sponsor, Camden River House Hotel and Inn. Thanks for making these possible. All right, everyone, have a good evening, and I'll see you next time. Bye, Matt. Thanks again.